Hey, everybody. So I got a question for you. If infidelity isn't just about sex or secrecy, and it can come from something deeper, and we think about what happens when one partner believes that they're simply entitled to something more, we have a therapist, a researcher, I guess you'd say, Hope Ray, joining me today to explore some of the roots, causes, or the roots of entitlement in relationships and how it can fuel betrayal and often some of the missing signs. So, don't know how much you know about this word entitlement. I know for me, the stuff that I've gotten from Hope, it's been a big deal. So, that's what we're going to go into today. Welcome to Beyond the Facade podcast. I'm your host, Luke Gordon, and I'm thrilled to have you join me in this space today. What we're going to be doing is diving deep into the trials and triumphs and truths of seeking authenticity. Becoming your true self isn't about a single action or moment. It's a relentless pursuit, a commitment to self that reveals the rich connection and meaning that our life has to offer. So whether this is your first time tuning in or you're a regular listener, know this: what you're building here goes beyond a conversation. You're here to challenge, to change, and to celebrate the incredible journey of becoming your authentic self. Because when you dare to show up fully, the rewards are immeasurable. So welcome to Beyond the Facade. Let's get started. All right. So just want to introduce Hope for a second here. So she's a therapist that's out of Michigan. She's certified a couple different things that I think are really noteworthy in this conversation. One, she's a certified clinical partner specialist with APSATs, and they're experts on betrayal trauma. And also she's a certified sexual addiction therapist. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is she's also the creator of the D.I.R.E model, which is what we're going to be basing our conversation off of. So Hope, feel free to defend yourself. What do you want to let people know about you before we do?
Well, they should probably know how much I care for and respect the work that you and Alana do, that we have a friendship and have known each other now for some years and have spent a lot of time together, both collaborating together, you two and me, or having you participate as what would you call that, Luke? I guess you were there to kind of help facilitate and guide discussion as a support in the first D.I.R.E group that I ever ran. So that was just a joy and an honor to have you there and supporting me and the men that way. So they should probably know that we know each other well and that we've been able to collaborate together.
Yeah, that was cool. We had a conversation one day where Hope invited me to help facilitate more of just support her in this new, it was the first time you rolled out that group, right?
Right. It was the live beta group where I invited several men from across the country and a few different countries to participate. And that is how I launched the program and was able to refine it because of their feedback and what did and didn't work for them. So,
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be a part of that. And I would say I was more of a participant than anything else. I learned a lot, and I'm excited to talk about some of those things today.
cool.
So there's your D.I.R.E model. Do you mind doing an overview of it so we can dive into something that I'm really excited to ask you some questions on?
Yeah, that sounds great. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity. So I imagine a lot of your listeners are in a more advanced state of recovery. Maybe there's folks coming to you right out the gate of maybe getting caught or being in the crisis of early discovery and betrayal. But for men who have found a way into sobriety or they've stopped acting out, they have enough structure around their sexual behavior, they're becoming more healthy in that arena. They're often working really hard on honesty and integrity and empathy and emotional intimacy with their partner. They're working to improve themselves in those areas. But what I find for men in advanced recovery is that they often get really stuck. And the stuckness is because there's some old programming going on there that is really intolerable for their partner because it shows these red flags of old programming to her that says, listen, you might be faithful to me now, but there's still this old mentality. There's still these thinking constructs that make me feel unsafe. And so our trust can only rebuild so far. They don't often have that second order, highest order change trust being built at the time. And a lot of partners feel like they're waiting. They feel like everything revolves around him. And that ends up becoming really frustrating for both parties in the marriage. But here's the thing, Luke, these men, they say to me, tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. They don't know what they need to know, but they're wanting to find it, right? So over the years, having worked with hundreds of couples, becoming really familiar with this fallow period, I call it, I learned that there are some things that they're doing that they don't realize that are deeply embedded and are still working against the trust rebuilding process. And so I've been able to identify 4 maladaptive character traits that I believe apply across the board, no matter if somebody feels that he is or isn't a sex addict, no matter if there's neurodivergence or differences on board like autism or ADHD, no matter if there's some personality issues around narcissism or if there's a lot of childhood trauma, it doesn't really matter the constellation of diagnostic material. All of these men find themselves in one common place, and that is they maintain a relationship with their partner while secretly and repeatedly violating fidelity, and then they use deception and gaslighting to cover it up. They use exploitative tactics, taking advantage of their partner's time and domestic labor and trust and spiritual conviction in the process of trying to keep things hidden. And I do believe that the majority of folks in that situation have made many choices to be there. It's not by accident they end up there. But I believe what undergirds that crossover into abusive behavior is these 4 maladaptive character traits. And I talk about D.I.R.E as detachment, incongruence, regression, and entitlement. And so my program is called Getting D.I.R.E Straight. And what we're doing is we're attenuating those 4 pieces that most men have in common because it's not enough for them just to become faithful. They have to undo old programming, deconstruct, so that they can provide the highest, most potent, and quality versions of honesty, intimacy, empathy, and integrity. And so most of the men who come to my program are already working on those things, but they're kind of blocked. They have like a ceiling on how far they're able to really develop in those areas because they haven't really looked at the dire traits. And that's what we're working to do.
I love that. I think about phase 1, if we refer to Patrick Carnes' work, not phase 1, but step 1, which is breaking through denial. How much of it do you think is subconscious and how much D.I.R.E helps them see things that they couldn't see before?
That's a great question. Well, I do believe most of the men, I mean, this program is for men in advanced recovery. I don't want somebody in there who's still trying to figure out how to get sober, right? That's foundational beginning work that needs to be accomplished before they can really look into some of these deeper issues. And they have more wherewithal to do that when there's been a period of sobriety. But I think that the men end up being more surrendered naturally by way of having a good solid structure for their mind and their behavior. And then they start to kind of awaken to how these dire traits are showing up. And I always reassure them that even if I don't know these men, I know them. In other words, these 4 traits, they all interplay together, they go together, they act like a siphonophore, this kind of independent but all connected network of traits that really form early on in childhood for good reason. We frame the dire traits as having once been necessary. Being able to detach when you're enmeshed with your mother is an important way to survive. Being able to show up incongruently is an important way to survive when there's a lot of anger in the home or rigid demands, and being able to show up so you don't get in more severe trouble but hide what you really feel inside. I mean, these would be examples of more extreme versions of childhood trauma that create this type of programming, but it outlives its value once men become adults who are trying to rebuild trust in their relationships. These self-protective types of mechanisms are working against the trust rebuilding process.
Okay, thank you. Probably one of the most enlightening parts of listening to you take me through D.I.R.E and the other men I was around was the entitlement piece. So, how do you define entitlements when it comes to relationships and betrayal?
Yeah. Well, I have a definition of entitlement that's extracted and separate from narcissism. I think pop psychology today has tried to corner the market on what entitlement means. And often it's painted as this very grandiose self image, this idea that I'm better than others, I deserve more than others. But the type of entitlement that I see at play for the men I work with is usually the opposite of that. In other words, their sense of masculinity feels threatened. Their internal dignity feels like it's getting squashed because of how others view them. So, in effort to protect themselves from feeling squashed, they may display or exhibit entitlement, which is, hey, I don't deserve that kind of treatment. Or if that's how you're going to be toward me, then I'll withhold this from you. And so, these kind of dynamics that are deeply rooted in a sense of not wanting to be stamped out because they don't feel secure and anchored in their own dignity and worth and value. The
Yeah.
main definition for it is essentially a sense of deservedness that's rooted in self protection versus being anchored in one's own inherent worth and dignity, which is immutable, unchanging. When somebody lays claim to their dignity, they're able to withstand more pressure and even mistreatment than they realize. They're also able to be abundantly generous with the amount of sacrifice and effort they bring to their relationship, and they stop trying to keep score about how much their partner's coming to the table for them.
What do you think about the resentment piece? Like, out of resentment shows up entitlement, or just am empowered, and I don't know. I don't even necessarily know the right way to ask this question, Hope, but I'm just picturing the resentment and it fueling some level of deservedness. Any thoughts on
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. I think when people aren't aware of the entitlement at play within their mentality, resentment is a natural byproduct of that. And we do talk a little bit about resentment, but honestly, I think the 12-step programming really handles resentment very well. So we're looking at finer details in the D.I.R.E program. But the outcome of having resentments certainly fuels more negative self protection. In other words, you're going to stop being more generous than you feel people deserve. You're
Mhm.
going to stop putting forth more effort where you feel you've done enough or you've earned your way at this point. And as you know, in the program, we use a lot of references from BUDS training in Navy SEAL candidacy program to identify ways in which people can learn about teamwork in a different way rather than the self-protective type of programming that's so deeply embedded, it's very hard to see. Except I'll tell you this, and Luke, you know it, the wives see it, and they've been trying to
The
call
wives see it.
yeah, they've been trying to call it out. And I have so many men who say, "I get it now, what she was saying. It felt really offensive to me until I understood what she meant."
And it's I don't wanna use the word impossible, but it's so hard to see it when she's talking about it, but when somebody else talks about it, it can feel a little bit easier to see, or a little more possible to see. And I don't know why, but the word doormat keeps coming up for me as a part of the journey of feeling like I don't have any power, I've relinquished my power, but I think it was you that was saying that, like, there's this, and Dr. Jake Porter refers to this. And I think if you guys will allow me to stumble over my words a little bit, but I feel some passion about this because we talk about a power imbalance that exists in a relationship, and the power is, it feels like, and I'll speak as a man, and what I hear men say is, now she has all the power. And I'm like, is that true? Is that really true? Because at any point you can say yes or no. You can take that back. And it's so problematic to view myself as not having power when I actually have the ability to take my power back. And I think that shows a lot of the, I can feel like I'm a doormat when I'm just showing up in a very much a victim place. And I think that has something to do with entitlement too.
Yeah. Certainly, that entitlement would be one of the 4 undergirding features of that, but the way that I explain it or teach it in the course is that we have this potential to become a floating saint when we're working to make penance for things we are truly ashamed of having done because we understand the pain and damage it caused. But the truth is that for anyone to say that they're powerless, that would mean they've emptied out of that power. And most of the time, the men who are in that, what I call floating saint mode, are actually operating in passive control, meaning it feels very powerless. It feels very much like their tail is tucked, but it's actually a passive form of control because it's inauthenticity. And that inauthenticity is something that they have to target right away, because if they don't, then all of their performative efforts to rebuild trust don't land well on their partner. Why? Because she can tell it's not really him. He's therapy speak. He's doing the strategies that, he's been told to show up with. And at the end of the day, if he doesn't find his own rooted authenticity and deal with the fact that, especially within entitlement, there's been some real fear that he's getting squashed in this process. If he doesn't learn to anchor in his own dignity, worth, and value, then he will never be able to really translate how trustworthy he has become to his partner, because there's too many veils over his performance mode. There's too many
Mm.
barriers between his core self and what she's seeing and detecting from him. And so that's really the work that we're doing to bring that down. And in doing so, this is how somebody addresses a power differential over time, by moving out of powerlessness into a place that is more about equity and showing up from that place.
How do you see them making that move? Just besides getting the information and understanding it, what actions do you see them taking?
Well, I have a whole method that I teach them to power down from all that strategy and performance into a basic authenticity. That's what we do in segment 1 of the D.I.R.E program. The Floating Saint is all about getting to your most basic authentic self. But it's uncomfortable. You can't stay there, first of all, but it is important to start there. It's uncomfortable for them to get there because they don't feel their authentic self is welcomed by their partner. She's in pain. She's experiencing trauma. Many times she's not interested in what he thinks and feels, right? So it's hard to display authenticity. So what we do next is we start to attenuate those dire traits. We begin to deconstruct them and clear out space of old programming. And then in segment 3, we're installing a new version of self by taking a look at what I call the pure method. Now, what I believe is that men who get into secret sexual behavior that they keep from their wives, I believe that they're looking for something. Whether they have a sex addiction or whatever they call it, they were looking for something to fill a void, to escape from. And then they get caught, and then they're in the throes of crisis and trying to rebuild and stabilize. It's not until really they get here and do this work that they actually find that thing that they've been looking for all along, which truly always comes down to a stable sense of internal worth and value, the ability to be present and authentic. That's where life is. That's where freedom and healing really is. That's where people feel like they are stepping into the fullest version of themselves. So once we've cleared the space in segment 2, that's what we do in segment 3 then, is how do you inhabit yourself, embody yourself in a way that shows her this change is actually real, allows you to emerge in a way that feels comfortable and healthy and whole for you as well.
We're going to take a quick break for a moment. I want to let you know of some things that we have coming up at Choose Recovery Services.
Hey friends, it's Hallie Roderick here, and I wanted to personally invite you to an incredible opportunity coming up this summer. From July 8th to 11th, Luke Gordon and I will be co-facilitating a Help Her Heal intensive for men in Spanish Fork, Utah. And if you're a man who's serious about rebuilding trust, creating emotional safety, and doing the deep work of repair after betrayal, this space is created specifically for you. This 4-day intensive is not a lecture series. It's a deeply experiential process designed to help you feel the shift, not just understand it intellectually. Together, we'll explore powerful tools and practices to help you develop real empathy, shame resiliency, and a clear understanding of betrayal trauma so you can begin to show up as a safe, trustworthy partner again. You'll also have the opportunity to connect with other men who are on the same path, men also committed to growth, their integrity, doing the hard work, and the beautiful work of relationship repair. So whether you're just beginning this process or you're well on your way, this intensive can be a powerful next step in your journey towards healing. So if you're ready to move forward, we'd love to have you join us. So to learn more or to reserve your spot, check out the show notes where you'll find a link to reach out to our office. So let's do this work together. Hope to see you in Utah.
Let's get back to our episode. I remember you talking about in your course, I remember you talking about where entitlement came from, and going back to family of origin and watching how mom would show up in a relationship with dad. And I remember that being like, wow, I'd never thought about it in that way before. How much is it? How important? It sounds like I'm loading this question. I'm really not, Hope. But how important is it to know the origin of and where we learn entitlement from?
I love that question. I speak directly to it in the program. You probably remember me saying, we need to go back and excavate that territory to figure out why it became necessary for you to employ this tactic. But once we have that knowledge, it doesn't mean you need to go back and do a ton of family of origin work around that. I do think that can be helpful, particularly when we're looking at what would qualify as adverse childhood events or what I call cardinal wounds. That stuff does need to be tended to and brought to therapy. But sometimes just the awareness of it is enough for a man to make a new choice. Because once he's been able to pinpoint why he started thinking a certain way, it illuminates to himself, holy cow, now I realize how trapped or held back I've been since my mentality was so limited to that type of approach to people, particularly the opposite sex. And it allows them to feel more freedom to show up in a way that isn't so fearful and isn't so self protective. That's part of
Mhm.
where the authenticity begins to blossom.
And we don't have to get way into the weeds of how you go about it in your group. People can go there and explore that with you because it's going to take a lot of energy and time, and it's all worth it. But I do remember you showing up talking about how mom would respond to dad and how mom either would come from a place of, 'cause I want people to have like a little bit of a taste or a teaser of what happens inside of if that's appropriate language,
Yeah.
inside of what happens inside of those groups. Because I remember you talking about how mom would show up with either really more subservient, is that the right word? Or the exact opposite, which is almost like of not having a level of respect for her partner for whatever reason it might be, one or the other. But can you help with that?
Yeah. So when it comes to entitlement specifically, we're looking at the template for intimacy that was established with the son and his mother or his maternal caregiver. Some people were raised by their
Mhm.
grandparents or by foster parents. Some people didn't have a mom or they had a wonderful mom and then she had passed away at some early age. So there's a whole array of things that can happen in childhood that either create a good foundation for connecting, bonding, having intimacy with the opposite sex, or can make it scary. So, the common dynamic that I talk about is if there was over nurturance from your mother in the area of intimacy, then we're looking at somebody who was maybe enmeshed with her son, relying on him as a surrogate partner, talking to him about things that were inappropriate, expecting too much of him, placing an emotional burden on him that was too much for his role and his age and his status as a child of hers. Then there's the opposite of that, the undernurturance place. If a mother was absent, or if she was harsh or cold, if she was involved with her own addiction or very unpredictable, then he wouldn't have received enough nurturance to establish a healthy give and take understanding of intimacy. So, subservience is another example of that when it comes to how was she positioned within the home or within the church or community that this boy grew up in? Was she quiet and relegated to helpmeet and support roles, or would it
Mhm.
be dominant and really the one who ran the household, the one around whom all the activity revolved? And these aren't necessarily always bad things that men are looking at when it comes to their relationship with their mothers, but they're helpful pieces of information
Mhm.
as they're excavating that landscape of where they learn to be intimate, to give and receive healthy emotional connection with women.
So if what we do is we go to our romantic partner and we maybe duplicate that goes on and we find some things that are familiar that are problematic, what do you say to the men that are like, oh, what if our relationship has to look a lot different because of what I formed and levels of unhealthiness in the beginning of our relationship? What's the level of hope we should be feeling if a lot of it was formed in something that was broken to begin with?
Are you talking about men saying that to their wives?
No, I'm thinking if I go, let me think of an experience. A son with his female caregiver, and maybe there was a lot of nurturing, over nurturing. And so he went into found a romantic attachment, but also there was an environment there where he expected that. And I'm not going to speak for what happened for her, but there's that. And it's like, I kind of feel like we're going to need an entirely new relationship for something healthy. And what if that just feels like an overwhelming experience of, man, I don't know, this is just going to feel like it's going to have to be completely new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a good question. Well, in my experience, I find that betrayal itself does correct a lot of dynamics when healing occurs for both parties. So, for instance, let's say there was a woman who was attracted to her mother enmeshed husband, didn't know it at the time, but she really is able to display a caregiving role that was appealing to him given his upbringing. And it worked for them until it no longer worked. In other words, when betrayal surfaces, I think it does kind of automatically redesign some of the dynamics, because what becomes so essential for the betrayed partner is equity. I need to no longer be in a one down position. There can no longer be any sort of power over me that I'm unaware of. And so I think her willingness to give to the relationship in those ways does automatically change. Not for everybody, but that's in general what I see. But I also see that as men find the thing they've been needing to find, and as they really walk in a manner of honesty, integrity, empathy, and intimacy that is at their potential, then they need less from their partner. So they kind of unassign that role of, you need to admire me, you need to support me, you need to make me feel good about myself or make me feel strong. They tend to be able to fulfill those questions themselves. And that doesn't necessarily displace her as the wife or the partner, because, like I said, betrayal changes perhaps how much she's willing to give anyway. So that tends to be my experience. But there are dynamics that, as a man becomes safer and more trustworthy, that may need to be explored in couples therapy once it's at that place where she feels ready to invest in the relationship, or even consider how she's coming to the table for the relationship. It takes a while though to get there.
Yeah, it takes a little while. Yeah, that's a little ways into the journey. Okay, so maybe we could start to round our conversation with this question that actually came up that a guy wanted me to ask you, which is, he's coming to a place where he's recognizing entitlement exists, and he wants to find this line between being able to express his own needs, but he doesn't know how to do that without crossing into some entitlement. He's recognizing, like, I've never been good at expressing my own needs, but I also don't want to do it in a way where I'm entitled. I feel like I should be authentic with my partner, but not put it on her. So,
Well, I commend him for his thinking, and he sounds very normal to me. And what I mean by that is that the men that I work with all are asking that question. And that's part of what we're addressing in hours worth of material, workbooks, group meetings, because there isn't a simple answer for it. Truly, the answer would be, you have to be able to show up authentically. But your authenticity isn't always welcome. So how can your authenticity be attuned to the situation, to the moment, right?
Mhm.
Well, that's the pure method that I teach, how to do that. So it's really a journey, but this is one of the biggest questions most people have. Okay, I get it. I need to be authentic, but it does not seem like she likes my authentic self. So what good is this doing? And as they work through it, they find more old programming that does need to be examined and replaced with something different. And it's kind of the whole purpose of the program. I truly believe that as men do this work, especially if they get into it wholeheartedly, they find that thing that probably led them down the addiction path in the first place. And authenticity becomes a new default mode, but it does require some practice. It does require some really hard work.
So what I hear you saying, it's not a simple answer. It almost sounds like tuning a piano or something, where you're like, I know what the hertz of middle C looks like, but I got to get there, and it takes some time.
Like an example,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
It takes some time, but I really think that can be expedited. That's part of why I designed this program, because if they know what they need to do and they're sold out to doing it, it can manifest well for them. We're all designed to do this kind of thing. This is truly a capacity everyone has. Unless somebody has significant cognitive impairment or a traumatic brain injury that impairs their brain, they have all the tools they already need inside of them. And what we're doing is highlighting the areas that they've essentially ran away from or didn't maybe even know existed within themselves that really need to be pulled forward in the driver's seat.
That's cool. Yeah. And you're right. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. I think what gets in the way is how we measure it. If we're measuring it, we measure it a certain way, then it can feel like it takes a long time. Okay. Well, I hope men that listen to this podcast can find you. So if they find you, where would they find you at?
My website is hoperay.com.
Okay. All right. And then the course or the work that you do, what's that called?
It's called Getting D.I.R.E Straight. So that's on the website. There's a tab up at the top of the website where it says D.I.R.E. You can read about it there. And it's one of those things that you can join at any time. It's always running. So people often want to know when they can start. If they're ready to start and they believe they're a good candidate, they can start immediately if they want to.
Awesome. Any other words for us before we close?
No, I just am grateful for you, Luke. I love the ability to have this open conversation around entitlement. Clarifying this is certainly the next wave of this particular industry we're both in. It is important to refine these details within one's thinking patterns because it's not enough to really save a marriage, to really rebuild trust and have something better than you once had before, to simply become faithful to the marriage. That's what your partner's probably been doing all along. And so she's not about to give you a high five for showing up with faithfulness, right? She needs to feel like she's got a man who's really not just solid, but whole inside. And so I just love the work you're doing with the men in that regard, and thankful for this conversation and appreciate you so much.
Yeah, me too. And then also just want to note, I've seen several men, a lot of men, that your work, Hope, really stuff stirs inside of them. It also promotes some strong feelings. Some like, I don't like what Hope's talking about. Like, I don't like it. And I've watched that happen with men. And I'm sure if I would have earlier on the journey met Hope and her work, I've been like, oh, this is rubbing me wrong. And I think it really was those maladaptive pieces that I really wasn't going to be able to tackle intimacy. So if you find yourself before, during, after with that work, just notice what's coming up inside of you. Just notice what it's stirring and why it's stirring it. Why does it hold such deep impact for you? And don't stop, explore that, get to know that. One thing I really love about you, Hope, is you'll take the tough questions. Like I won't say you're not scared of them because I don't know your emotions attached to it, but you'll take them, you'll face them straight on. So good for you.
And I don't even have to work all that hard because the men in the group, there's just some real all-stars in there. These men, some of them have been through the program more than once. And I think it's a great testimony to the fact that if their marriages are going well and they're still continuing the work, to me, that's the highest compliment about the content, that they are finding it that relevant even when things are going well. They've rebuilt quite a bit, but they're still in there. And so they do a great job of calling men in. And I often in our groups will ask the men to respond in that way. And it's just a really safe environment. I think it's interesting how quickly some men tune in to things that they might be more hesitant to look at because there's other men doing it with them. They're not alone. Yeah. And so that's really special. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it is good stuff. Cool. Well, thank you, Hope.
Thanks for having me, Luke.
And take care, everybody.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. If this is something that you connected with, I'd love to meet with you more and talk about it. So what you can do is go to chooserecoveryservices.com or check the show notes. And there what we can do is set up a quick conversation to meet. Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Facade, where we unmask the authentic self.